Hey folks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is the beginning of my vlog for the October 2023 Dewey's 24-hour readathon. So we're about six or 7 minutes away from the start of the readathon, which for me starts at 11 p.m. here in Canberra. And what I'm planning to start with is, and you'll have seen them in my TBR video, of course, already on this channel. I'm going to start with these two because it's so late. I don't want to get into something that too heavy, something that's going to take a while to read. So Love and Friendship and Other Youthful Writings by Jane Austen is a whole collection of different short bits and pieces that she wrote before the age of 21, which I'm almost halfway through. And Amanda Gorman's Call Us What We Carry is a collection of poetry that I've had sitting on my to-be-read shelf for a little while. So these are sort of short little things that I can switch back and forth between because it's 11 p.m, I'm a little bit tired, and I could doze off at any point, particularly as it's an F1 sprint race weekend, which is occurring in America, which means my alarm will be being set for 4:30 for the sprint shootout. So I want to get as much sleep as I can before that point, but also I tend not to sleep until early hours of the morning. So we'll see how we go, but at the moment the aim is to switch back and forth between these two things for the initial hour or two, I guess, of the readathon. Good morning. It's probably less than 10 minutes to go until 9 o'clock. I'm awake-ish, tired but awake and dressed and stuff. I've already watched, I got up for the sprint race qualifying and then got up again for the second F1 Academy race. So before I did go to sleep last night, I did do some reading. I read about 20 pages of Amanda Gorman's poetry collection. And I read about 11 pages of Love and Friendship, which was essentially a little scrappy collection of fictional letters on various topics. So that's what I read so far, plus a bit of fan fiction, let's be perfectly honest, because I was in the middle of something when the readathon started, so I kind of finished that off as well. But yes, so I have a few minutes until the actual sprint race starts, so I will be watching that and maybe reading a little bit more poetry. After that, I will have to make a decision as to which novel I want to start with. Probably I'm thinking maybe finishing off Skin of the Sea, but we'll see how we go. Hey, so it's 11 o'clock in the morning. It's halfway through the readathon. Time for a check-in. I have been reading some more poetry. I'm 33 pages into this now. I'm enjoying it. Like, her poetry is quite... Because I tend to read poetry aloud, and hers is quite smooth in terms of speaking. It's I think, very meant to be spoken. That's how it feels in the mouth. And I have read more of Skin of the Sea, so I am like 70% of the way through this now. So 219 pages in. It's only like a 303 page book. Enjoying it. It's starting to head towards the climax now. Yeah, it's Nigerian folklore combined with adventure and mermaids and a quest, but it's good. I'm enjoying it. Yes, very much enjoying it. Sorry, I'm being very vague. I'm still quite tired because I have not had a lot of sleep. But yes, that's where I'm up to at the moment. So I will continue on with Skin of the Sea and I will continue on with the poetry. Hey, it's about 20 past 12 and I have finished Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. So really enjoyed it. Really interesting world building using all sorts of West African mythology, which she talks about a bit in her afterword. Mermaids and a quest, and all set in the sort of 1400s slavery has just started. The Portuguese have just started essentially enslaving West Africans and taking them away. So it's all set against that background, but it's really very deeply wrapped in sort of West African mythology, and really enjoyable. And I will definitely look into acquiring the sequel so I can read that. But yes, the end was good and wrapped up, but also a little bit sad, as anything based on The Little Mermaid as a structure would have to be, because The Little Mermaid is actually a tragedy, not the Disney version, the original version. So yeah, but really enjoyable. And so I have finished a book. Woo! So for the next little while, I'm going to continue reading Amanda Gorman's poetry. I'm now about, I think, 40 pages into it. So I'm going to continue with that. And also, I think I'm going to read a little bit of A Wealth of Women, as sort of non-fiction and a bit of a palate cleanser along with the poetry, to sort of let Skin of the Sea settle in my brain a little bit, before I pick up another novel, which will be Shadowfall, because it's the other novel on my list, apart from, of course, my current ebook, which I'll go running later this afternoon and read a bit of that. But for the moment, also because I think I need to grab some lunch and stuff like that, I'm going to read some more poetry and a bit of A Wealth of Women, history of Australian women's lives from 1788 to now. Given that it's from 1788, I am going to guess there's probably not going to be a lot about Indigenous women, but you know, still, it should be interesting. And I might read a little bit more fanfic as well, because I can't quite leave it alone. It's sort of all up in my head right now. But yeah, so some food and some poetry and some non-fiction, and then I might attack a new novel later. Hey, it's 3 in the afternoon and I'm still reading. So I have read a few more poems by Amanda Gorman. I'm still very much enjoying them. I'm sort of picking them up every time I need a little break. And I have finished chapter 2 of A Wealth of Women by Alison Alexander. So that takes me to about nearly 60 pages into the book. It's interesting. It's not too dense, which is good. It's a little frustrating in that it's one of those kind of non-fiction books which has the narrative of the chapter and then just random boxes with other information, like other little anecdotes. And so it interrupts the flow of reading a little bit. But I think I'm going to continue with it because this has been sitting on my currently reading shelf for years, having only read one chapter. I picked it up, read a chapter, then just never got back to it. So I would like to get that off my currently reading shelf. So if I can finish this, it'll be really, really good. It may cut into what else I can read during the readathon, because non-fiction does take me a while longer to read than fiction. I'm just not as fast when I read non-fiction, but still, I would like to finish reading this just so it's ticked off my list, and because I'm always interested in the history of women, particularly the history of women in Australia. So the chapter I just read was about sort of 19th century women in Australia. The next chapter is Building a Nation, so I'm assuming that's going to start covering the suffrage movement, which I'm actually reading an audiobook about at the moment. So this is probably not going to have as much detail, but yeah, still interesting. Still get a different perspective on it, which is interesting. And what I said earlier about how it's probably just a view of white women in Australia, it does point that out, that this is mostly, it refers to them as white women a lot. So it does acknowledge the fact that this is not including the stories of, for example, at least in what I've read so far, of Indigenous women or Chinese women, or because there are a lot of Chinese people in, a lot of Chinese immigrants in Australia in the 19th century. So yeah, it's very clear that it's not covering those stories at the moment. Whether it will cover some of those stories later in the book, I don't know. But at least it's being self-aware. So that's good. Yeah, so that's where I'm up to at the moment. I'm not quite ready to go for a run yet. So probably a few more hours of sitting around at home reading these 2 books. And let's face it, fan fiction because sometimes I just need to elsewhere. But yeah, a couple more hours I think of reading before I think about going to the gym. And actually I need to charge my Kindle because I seem to remember last time it was down to 10%. So I should go and do that. Hey look, I've changed outfits. That's because I'm about to go to the gym. Which means ebooks. So I'm still making progress on both A Wealth of Women and the poetry. Finished, I'm nearly 100 pages into the history, and I think I'm nearly at 60 pages, I think, for the poetry. But yeah, ebooks is what's going to happen at the gym. So my current main gym ebook is Codex Born by Jim C. Hines, which is the second in the Magic Ex Libris series. I'm rereading this because I never got around to finishing the series and they're sitting on my TBR shelf. As it turns out, it's been 9 years since I read the first two books. And while the first book was vaguely familiar, I have no memories whatsoever of this second book. So it's pretty much like reading it again for the first time because I literally don't remember what happened. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to be feeling that book today though. So the other thing is not going to count for any of my reading goals or anything, but I've been there's always some, I read and reread Austen variation novels a lot. I only ever count them once in a year, and sometimes not even once in a year. Sometimes I'm reading so many I just stop including them in any of my data. And there's a couple that I have been rereading recently as well, just, because sometimes you want to read, you want something to occupy you, but you don't actually want to think very hard. So those are my options for running at the gym. It'll probably take me about an hour. So yeah, after I get back and shower, I guess then I'll go back to the history and the poetry. So it's nearly 9 o'clock in the evening, which means there's about 2 hours left of the readathon. I did manage to read a couple more chapters of Codex Born when I was at the gym, so that was equal to about 10%. And I have continued reading the Amanda Gorman poems and A Wealth of Women, including the fact that I've just finished a chapter on Indigenous women in the early part of Australia, which was actually interestingly written by a different author than Alison Alexander. I think from the tone of the piece, it was actually written by maybe an Indigenous author. So that was good. I don't think I'm going to finish either of these because I'm 40-ish% of the way through this one and 30-something% of the way through this one, and there's only 2 hours left, so I doubt I'm going to finish either of them, which is a little bit disappointing. But then again, nonfiction and poetry, I've said it before, are a slower reading process for me. Nonfiction because it's just doesn't have the pace of and it can be quite dry at times, and poetry because I tend to read it out loud. So yeah, it's possible if I only read the poetry I might get through this in the next 2 hours, but we'll see how I feel. Right, so it's Monday evening and I'm finally getting to wrap up this vlog. So I usually wrap things up straight after the readathon, except I ended up making the decision to spend most of the last 2 hours of the readathon last night reading aloud, and by the time I got to the end of it, my voice was shot and my throat was sore, and I pretty much was like, no, I'm not doing anything, I'm not speaking for a bit. So Dewey's wrapped up. What did I read? I read 11 pages of Jane Austen's Love and Friendship. I finished reading Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen, which I was about halfway through. So finished reading that. So that was really good achievement. I read about another 10% of Codex Born when I was at the gym. I also read a large chunk of this, A Wealth of Women by Alison Alexander. I had only read one chapter previously, and so I've read another 4 chapters, which is like, honestly, I think it's like a bit over 100 pages. So that's a history book. So enjoying that. But yeah, got through a chunk. I do read history, like non-fiction, quite slower. And the other thing I did was I read the entirety of Amanda Gorman's Call Us What We Carry. So this is her poetry collection. It was published, when was it published? It's definitely like a post-pandemic, published in 2021. So, well, mid-pandemic really. Read it all out, almost all out loud. There are a few things that I didn't read out loud because they were a bit wordier. But it's a really good collection, guys. Like, really, really, really good collection. I really enjoyed it. It's eminently, like, I like reading most poetry aloud. It's eminently read out loudable. It's like, it just trips off the tongue. Her words are just like, she doesn't get really, really deep in the metaphor, which is good because that confuses me. But also, like, the rhythm of her words. There's a couple of techniques that she uses that stood out to me. She uses a lot of alliteration. Also a lot of this and this, this and this. So like a lot of ampersands. And she also has the tendency, a lot of her poems are inspired by like definitions of words or etymology of words. And she like actually includes the definitions in the poetry, or there's a whole section where she actually is essentially creating poetry out of old letters and historical documents, which is really fascinating. And there are a couple of poems that really, really moved me. But yeah, there's a lot in it about COVID and how humanity was coping with COVID. There's a lot about racism and the Black Lives Matter movement, and politics. And yeah, and like the last one in there is the one that she read at the President Biden's inauguration. So really enjoyed that. So essentially I finished 2 things, which is less than I was hoping, but you know, I'm still quite pleased. So I finished off that novel, and I read the entirety of that poetry collection, which is over 200 pages. So, you know, read a good chunk out of this and read a couple of small chunks out of other things that are on my currently reading pile. So a reasonably successful yet reasonably relaxed Dewey's. I'm nowhere near as intense with Dewey's as I used to be. Like, I used to be seriously intense. But like these days I'm like, if I want to go and, you know, read a bit of fan fiction for 20 minutes or play like Farmville for 20 minutes or something to give my brain a break, I will. But yeah, that was my Dewey's 2023 October readathon. That was a really awkward way of saying it. Yeah, as usual, if you want to discuss any of these books in the comments below, I'm happy to. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye.